Hey guys, it's Ethan from Zimmer Labs, and I'm just doing a quick video, just an instructional video on the easy and probably best way to take the Inception apart, or just kind of gain access to the interior if you want to work on the SD card or the USB, or otherwise get into the electronics. I've made a lot of these, and there's a lot of happy customers out there, but I have definitely heard that if there's one issue with this hilt, that it's not the most intuitive thing in the world, and it's not necessarily always the easiest thing to get things to line up, to gain access to the internal components, and then have it go back together, have everything line up correctly. So I thought it would be a good idea to just give you guys a quick, 2-minute explanation on the best way to do it. So the best way to start is to show you guys, to begin with, the electronics are here underneath this little removable panel. It's just on clips, so it just pops off. There are 2 steel bars here that the clips attach to. So that's that. And this threaded section is permanently mounted to the center section. So when you unscrew this, it's always going to unscrew, and that's going to stay there. The next bit is the pommel. The pommel unscrews and comes off because it's wide enough to go over the speaker, whereas this guy is not. So when you unscrew this guy and you slide it down, it only goes to there. And that's intentional. The chassis is designed to catch this portion, so when you slide it back, it doesn't come off. Then also, the pommel is 2 pieces. The very, very bottom does also unscrew. I think the purpose of that was that Roman's gives you 2 different bottom caps. One is solid and one is vented for sound. So otherwise, there really isn't any point to removing that. But sometimes, because this chassis is a tight fit, and if you don't build it just right, you don't necessarily have enough room for the speaker to work without contacting the bottom plate. So it's nice to have the ability to just unscrew that 1 turn, half a turn maybe. You don't see a big difference, but that half a millimeter of space that you gain by doing that might be enough to get your speaker to work perfectly. In which case, if that's an easy solution for you, go for it, and then just apply a little bit of thread lock compound here, or even just some epoxy or glue, and then screw it to where you want it to be and leave it to let it dry. That way this won't rattle, it won't be loose, it'll be permanently affixed, but it'll be right at the level that you want it to be. But ideally, when you build this guy, if you do it just right, everything will line up and nothing will touch anything, and you won't have to worry about that. For those of you who've done this and you run into that issue, that's a quick fix. It's not the right way to do it, but it's an easy way to do it. Now to disassemble. The other side, same situation here. The threads are going to remain attached to the center section. This is your crystal chamber area, and your blade connection is made by the pogo pins on the inside of both of these, so the flat side and then the pin side. Now that's important because when you put this in and you screw it in, these pins are spring-loaded, right? So that means that when you screw this in, it's going to be under pressure if they're connected upright, which means that the chassis is going to want to press itself back towards the back of the saber, because those pins, the springs in them, are pushing it back. Which means that when you open this guy up and you want to take this chassis and slide it back so that you have easier access to this USB port, because right there we've got a 1/2 inch, not even, and that's not really a lot of room to get a USB into this or to get the SD card out. So the solution is to release the chassis. But you'll notice when you unscrew this, it's already pushing itself back up because of the spring-loaded pogo pins. So to avoid that, a simple solution is to unscrew the front end first. You don't even have to unscrew it all the way. If you unscrew it that much, enough that you've got 1/8 of an inch maybe, this is no longer under tension because those pins are no longer being pushed against the other connector, which means this screw is now easy to remove. It's not under any pressure. The chassis is not trying to move on its own to force this screw to go sideways. And when you're reinserting it, that's important because it's tricky. You have to line up the hole with this fat section of the chassis right here. Now I added a little cutout right there, which shows me that's the spot where the pin should go. So if I line up that cutout with the center of the hole, then I know it's going in the right spot. But if you're trying to do that and this is pushing up and fighting against you at the same time, it gets a little tricky to get that screw in there. And because this screw is a very delicate screw, it's very easy to break. It's kind of a design flaw with this hilt. It's one of the only design flaws. Because the center of the screw is milled out to give it that center relief appearance, to give it that look, that means that it's barely connected. The screw part is barely connected to this top part. So if you go to unscrew it and you have to apply any force at all, it's really simple to just break that piece right off. This one has already been broken. My customer had that issue, that exact issue, and broke it. So I epoxied it back on. It doesn't look quite as good as it used to, but it looks pretty darn much the same. But ideally you don't want to have a broken screw because you spent a lot of money on this hilt, and this hilt is designed to look really nice. So if you can keep it in as perfect condition as possible, that's the ideal thing to do. So the real trick here is to make a little mark on this part of the chassis so you know where the screw should line up with, because you can't see it once it slides in. That's a big help. And then the second trick is to remove the front end so that the pogo pins are not creating spring-loaded tension on the chassis when you're trying to unscrew this. Those are the two main tricks that make life easier when you're trying to gain access to this chassis. So I'll remove the screw, and now you see you can slide it up another ½ inch, which gives you that much more room to plug a USB or use tweezers to gain access to the SD card underneath it. And that difference is huge, because that in reality is a doable thing, whereas this basically not even doable. So simple as that. That's about it. I'm going to put it back together, and you'll notice that when I'm putting this chassis back in and putting the screw back in, I still have this front section loose, just to make my life easier trying to line it up. Now that it's in, I can screw this guy in, and I can put the cover back on. Everything is lined up as it should be, and the speaker is not going to come into contact with the bottom because everything inside is set up the way it's supposed to be. And that's about it. I'll turn it on so you guys can see. No contact, no distorted speaker noise. We've got contact for the blade connectors because you can tell because it's lit up. And that's about it. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope that's helpful to any of you guys out there, and of course to my customers who may have this exact issue. Just, you know, the best thing to do with lightsabers, especially when you get a nice one, is to learn it, play with it, take it apart. Don't take it apart too much. Don't take it apart to a point where you're exposing wires that are inside of things, but, you know, use common sense and investigate and kind of look into your lightsaber and get to know it. Get familiar with how it works, how it's set up and aligned, and how it's constructed, because the more you know it, the easier it will be for you to work with it, troubleshoot it if anything goes wrong, make changes to it, just generally enjoy it. If you don't really know how it works, you don't really know how things are supposed to be aligned or how they're intended to be aligned, then you may run into problems later on when you're trying to adjust stuff and you have to open things up and you don't know how they're supposed to be or intended to be placed, and you're trying to put things back together, close it up, and it's not closing right. That's one of the most common times when you're going to find a lightsaber gets damaged or broken, where it has to get sent back in for repairs, is when people are doing it themselves, and they're forcing things because things aren't quite lined up. And that's really common. It's really easy to get something slightly misaligned, and then if you have to apply any amount of force, you're going to start breaking stuff. Break a wire, maybe break a little pogo pin. There's a lot of stuff in here is really delicate. And they all work, and they're all rugged enough to work exactly as they're supposed to, but they're not rugged enough to withstand being jammed and forced. So that's it. That's my 2 cents, and hopefully that is helpful to you guys. And of course, thank you as always for watching.